Rebecca and I are here today from the IRM's Charity Special Interest Group to discuss setting your risk appetite.
Alison, risk consultants and auditors seem to be talking a lot about risk appetite at the moment. Can you tell us what it is and why it's so important we think about it?
Okay, risk appetite is often defined as the amount of risk that an organisation is willing to seek or accept in the pursuit of its long-term objectives. To give a personal example people might be able to relate to, I'm having diving lessons. My objective is to get better at diving. My local swimming pool has 3 different height diving boards. At the moment, I would only be comfortable diving off the springboard that's a couple of feet above the pool, as I wouldn't want to hurt myself too much if things go wrong. But I would have no appetite for throwing myself off the 10-metre board, as I'm not prepared to take the risk of hurting myself badly at the moment.
Okay, so what's risk tolerance then? I hear that term used quite a bit too. Is it the same thing?
Not quite. This refers to the amount of risk an organisation could actually take, usually from a financial perspective, before the charity is significantly impacted. They're linked, and most organisations' risk appetite ought to be lower than their risk tolerance. So, for example, we might hope to spend no more than £100,000 on a project. That's our appetite. But we could afford or tolerate spending £110,000 if necessary to get what we want. But any more than that and we'd be in trouble.
So why do we need to think about risk appetite?
No organisation can really achieve its objectives without taking risks. But you need to be clear how much risk you're prepared and able to take. Defining your risk appetite establishes clear parameters within which your people can work and succeed. Going back to what I said just now, if you don't make it clear that you only have an appetite to spend £100,000 on the project, how is the project manager going to deliver what you want without bankrupting the charity?
Okay, so taking the example you've just given, in reality, people probably are already thinking about their risk appetite, but they just haven't called it that.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure every project manager would be told how much they could spend, for example, and there will be other areas where we clearly tell people what they can and can't do because we're concerned about the risks involved in working outside those parameters.
And I think we talked about it briefly in our Getting Started materials.
You're right, we did. If you've already started to identify, assess and manage risks to your objectives, you'll have had discussions about the risks you're really worried about and those that you may be happy to just keep an eye on. You may have developed some criteria for assessing risks. In doing this, you've actually established your appetite and tolerance to these risks. This table might be familiar if you've read our Getting Started guidance. It's a simple and visual way of identifying the key risks, or the red risks, by plotting them on this matrix once you've already done the hard work of identifying and scoring them.
So tell us then, what else are we being expected to do now?
Using the same criteria for all risks may work well for you, but it might be that you want or need to take a different approach to different categories of risk or different strategic objectives. So, as we say in our guide, you might have no appetite for any activity that could potentially harm a service user, but you might be prepared to take a number of risks in developing new ways of raising income.
Well, that makes sense. So how do you suggest we go about establishing our risk appetite?
Well, it definitely isn't something you can just leap into and get done in 5 minutes. Setting risk appetite can be complex, and as it's an emerging discipline, it will be new to many charities. My advice would be to start with some research. Our simple guide should help, but there is more information available on the IRM's website as well. Perhaps also talk to other charities that have set their risk appetite.
Oh dear, I was hoping it was all going to be straightforward. Can you give us a few tips?
Of course. Your risk register will be your starting point, and if that hasn't been looked at in a while, then I suggest getting that up to date before doing anything else. Then you need to involve your trustees. We've talked before about their responsibility for risk management, so they must be involved in agreeing your risk appetite. Talk to them about what risks they're comfortable with the charity taking and those they want to avoid at all costs. You could do this at a board away day, meeting with them individually, or even sending out a survey. But don't just talk to the trustees. What we're really talking about here are the parameters in which the whole organisation will work, so everyone needs to be engaged with this. Talk to both internal and external stakeholders where you can. They're bound to come up with some useful and often different insights. In the guide we've produced, available on the SIG's web page, we give some ideas for engaging everyone and some questions to ask. A few of these are on the slide too, as you can see. I'm going to look at that.
And am I right in thinking that part of this is also about thinking about how much risk you're prepared to take in total?
Yes, you are, and this is perhaps the most complicated part. Think about whether you could cope if you decide to be risk-seeking in too many areas at once. Would it be wise to start up a retail arm at the same time as you open new services and fund controversial research? You need to remember too that often risks are linked, which can increase the overall impact.
So Alison, I've heard people mention risk appetite statements. Presumably that's the record of everything that's agreed through the discussions we just talked about.
It is, and I'm pleased to say that this is where it all starts to get a bit easier. Once the review and consultation phases have been completed, some organisations produce long narrative statements, which unfortunately tend to end up gathering dust on a shelf, unused, as it's so difficult to pick out what risks are or are not acceptable. The whole point of doing this is to set out clearly for everyone what risks they may take and what are unacceptable. Getting this right can really empower people and reduce unnecessary escalation. My view is that the statement needs to be set out as simply as possible so it can be used to aid decision making and day-to-day operations. The SIG has done some work on this and produced a template which we think works well. Here's an example of one risk area. So on this one, we've got the employees who are going on secondment in war zones, which is a pretty high risk. This organisation has decided that it's fine if the employees are just going to the capital cities of the existing countries that are supported, because they've been properly risk assessed, and you keep up-to-date information on any changes. What will not be accepted is travel outside of the country's capital or to new African. This is unique to that particular charity. There's also a fourth column called escalation. So if an employee wants to go out of the capital with hopefully good reason whilst on secondment, they need to escalate and ask someone more senior whether this is possible, because it falls outside their appetite or required. So for example, if somebody is staying in South Africa, which is an acceptable country, and wants to travel over to Zimbabwe, perhaps to buy something unique to that country, then that too would require escalation. There are lots more examples in our guide, and of course before this table and even after this table you may want to put some basic text around the context of your risk appetite setting and summarising the purposes of the table as well.
I really like this. I think it looks really easy to understand. If you had a table like this for each key risk, I imagine you'd only have 1 or 2 pages for the whole organisation. You could easily give that to staff so everyone knows exactly how they're supposed to operate.
Yeah, you raise an important point there, Rebecca. Communication. There is no point agreeing your risk appetite with trustees if you don't then tell everybody about it. It's really important to tell all relevant parties, everyone who might be making decisions in these risk areas, about the agreed risk appetite, and make sure they understand it too. This will all be much easier, of course, if you've engaged them in the process in the first place.
Okay, so when we've done all that, is that it?
Well, just as we stressed in getting started, risk management is definitely not a one-off process. Risks need to be monitored regularly. Things change and new risks emerge. And as risks change, and indeed the external landscape in which you operate changes, your appetite might change too. Taking my earlier example, when I get better at diving, I might well have an appetite for trying handstand backwards somersault dives off the 10-metre board, and that's a whole new area to risk manage. So you need to review your risk appetite in the same way you do your risk register, and probably at the same time too. Here's another example. In this picture, you can see someone swimming in a beautiful tropical sea which has been perfectly safe for years. If you were taking your family on holiday here, you'd probably let your children go swimming, with the usual caveats. But consider this picture. Yep, a great white shark has been spotted at a nearby beach. Is your appetite for swimming the same now? Probably not.
Definitely not. Okay, so that's all for today. It's been a quick run through of a few key points on risk appetite, but you can find more guidance on our website as usual. Thanks for listening, and if you have any queries, do feel free to contact us.